lose belly fat has nothing to do with what you eat for breakfast, and everything to do with what happens before breakfast. Imagine this. Two people wake up at exactly the same time. They eat the same meals. They follow similar diets. They even walk the same number of steps each day. Yet one steadily loses fat while the other feels stuck. The scale barely moves. The belly remains, energy stays low. Why? The answer may begin within the first few minutes after waking up, because long before you take your first bite of food, your body is already making important metabolic decisions that can either push you toward fat burning or quietly steer you back toward fat storage. And if you're over 50, those early morning decisions matter more than ever. Today, we're going to explore a simple 3-minute morning routine that targets one of the biggest hidden obstacles to fat loss after midlife: elevated insulin. This isn't a miracle hack. It's not a detox. It's not a supplement being sold in the comments section. It's a science-based sequence designed to work with your body's natural biology during one of the most powerful metabolic windows of the day. And once you understand what's happening during those first few minutes after waking up, you'll never look at your morning routine the same way again. Before we talk about the routine itself, we need to understand the real problem. Most people think gaining fat after 50 is simply a calorie problem. Eat less, move more, try harder. But if it were really that simple, millions of adults wouldn't be doing exactly that and still struggling. The reality is that fat loss is heavily influenced by hormones, and among those hormones, insulin plays a central role. Insulin is often described as a blood sugar hormone, and that's true. Every time you eat carbohydrates, and to a lesser extent protein, insulin helps move nutrients from your bloodstream into your cells. Without insulin, blood sugar would rise to dangerous levels. So insulin isn't the enemy. In fact, insulin is essential for life. The problem begins when insulin stays elevated too often and for too long. When insulin levels remain high, your body receives a very specific message: store energy, protect fat reserves, delay fat burning. Think of insulin as a traffic signal. When insulin is high, the light turns red for fat burning. When insulin falls, the light begins to turn green. This is why many people can be in a calorie deficit and still feel like fat loss is slower than expected. Their hormonal environment is working against them. And this challenge becomes increasingly common after age 50. As we get older, our muscle mass naturally declines. This process, known as sarcopenia, starts gradually in our 40s and accelerates with age. Why does that matter? Because skeletal muscle is one of the largest glucose storage systems in the entire body. Less muscle means fewer places for glucose to go. As a result, the body often needs to release more insulin to keep blood sugar under control. At the same time, many adults become less insulin sensitive. In simple terms, insulin has to work harder to produce the same effect it once did effortlessly. This combination creates the perfect environment for stubborn fat gain, especially around the waistline. And here's the frustrating part. Most people don't even realize it's happening. They blame aging. They blame genetics. They blame lack of motivation. Meanwhile, the real issue is often hiding beneath the surface inside their metabolic system. Now let's talk about something that surprises many people. Your body does not wake up metabolically neutral. In fact, several hours before you open your eyes, a carefully orchestrated hormonal process is already underway. Your brain begins preparing your body for the day ahead. One of the key players in this process is cortisol. Cortisol often gets a bad reputation because it's known as the stress hormone. But cortisol is not inherently harmful. In healthy amounts, cortisol helps regulate blood pressure, energy production, immune function, and alertness. Without cortisol, getting out of bed would be difficult. The challenge is that cortisol naturally spikes in the early morning. Researchers call this the cortisol awakening response. It's your body's built-in alarm clock. This rise in cortisol helps mobilize energy so you can transition from sleep to activity. But cortisol has another effect. It signals the liver to release stored glucose into the bloodstream. In other words, your blood sugar can rise before you've eaten anything at all. This phenomenon is especially noticeable in older adults and people with reduced insulin sensitivity. You wake up, blood sugar rises. Insulin responds, And all of this can happen before breakfast. Now imagine what happens next. You reach for your phone, you start checking emails, you scroll through social media, you think about deadlines, responsibilities, bills, and everything else waiting for you. Your stress level increases, cortisol remains elevated. Then comes the typical breakfast: a muffin, a bowl of cereal, orange juice, sweetened coffee, toast, and jam. Foods that digest quickly and rapidly increase blood glucose. Now insulin climbs even higher. Your muscles are still inactive. Your body is still relatively dehydrated from sleep. And before the morning is half over, you've unintentionally created the exact hormonal conditions that encourage fat storage. The surprising part isn't that this happens. The surprising part is how normal it has become. Millions of people start every day this way. Then they spend the rest of the day trying to undo the metabolic consequences. What if instead of fighting your biology, you worked with it? What if the first 3 minutes of your morning could help redirect those hormonal signals before they gain momentum? That's exactly where the 3-minute insulin reset begins. And the first step may be the most overlooked tool in metabolic health: your muscles. Let's continue where we left off. If your metabolism has been working against you for years, the solution isn't necessarily a harder workout or a stricter diet. Sometimes the biggest change comes from giving your body a better signal at the exact moment it's most ready to listen. And that brings us to the first minute of the 3-minute insulin reset. The goal isn't to burn calories. The goal isn't to get your heart rate as high as possible. The goal is to activate your muscles. That distinction matters. Most people think exercise helps fat loss because it burns calories. While that's partially true, one of the most powerful effects of muscle activity has nothing to do with calories at all. It has to do with glucose. When muscle cells contract, they open special transport pathways that allow glucose to move from the bloodstream into the muscle. What's fascinating is that this process can occur even with less insulin involvement. In simple language, your muscles become a sponge for excess blood sugar. And that's exactly what we want during the first few minutes after waking. Remember, your liver has already released glucose into circulation. Your blood sugar has already started to rise. Your body is already preparing to release insulin. The faster your muscles begin using that glucose, the less pressure your pancreas may face. That's why the first minute isn't about intensity. It's about activation. 10 slow bodyweight squats. 10 marching knee raises. 10 calf raises. Simple movements. No equipment. No gym membership. No sweating through your pajamas. Yet these movements activate some of the largest muscles in the human body. Your quadriceps, your glutes, your calves, your hip flexors. Collectively, these muscles represent one of the largest glucose disposal systems you possess. Think of them as metabolic engines that have been sitting idle overnight. The moment they begin moving, they start demanding fuel, and fuel means glucose. This is one reason researchers continue to emphasize the importance of preserving muscle mass as we age. After 50, maintaining muscle isn't just about strength. It's about metabolic health. It's about insulin sensitivity. It's about helping the body regulate blood sugar more efficiently. And perhaps most importantly, it's about creating an internal environment where fat burning becomes easier. Now let's move to minute number 2. Breathing. At first glance, breathing may seem unrelated to fat loss. After all, we breathe all day without thinking about it. But controlled breathing is different, and its effects on stress hormones can be surprisingly powerful. Here's something many people don't realize. Your nervous system operates through 2 primary modes: the sympathetic nervous system, often called the fight-or-flight system, and the parasympathetic nervous system, often called the rest and recover system. When you're stressed, rushed, anxious, or overwhelmed, sympathetic activity rises, heart rate increases, cortisol increases, blood sugar often rises. Your body prepares for action. This response was incredibly useful when our ancestors needed to escape danger. But in modern life, the same system activates because of emails, financial worries, traffic, news headlines, and social media notifications. The body reacts as if a threat is present, even when no physical threat exists. The result is chronic low-grade stress. And chronic stress has a direct impact on insulin. Multiple studies have shown that elevated stress hormones can worsen insulin sensitivity over time. In other words, stress can make it harder for your cells to respond appropriately to insulin. That's one reason some people gain weight during stressful periods even when their diet hasn't changed dramatically. Their hormonal environment changes, their biology changes, their metabolism changes. This is why the second minute of the routine focuses on calming the nervous system. One of the simplest methods is box breathing. Inhale through the nose for 4 counts. Hold for 4. Exhale slowly for 4. Hold again for 4. Repeat. The rhythm is important. Slow breathing sends a message to the brain that the environment is safe. Heart rate begins to settle. Stress responses begin to soften. The nervous system shifts toward recovery mode. Now, let's be realistic. 1 minute of breathing isn't going to eliminate every source of stress in your life. It won't pay your bills. It won't solve family conflicts. It won't erase decades of habits, but it can interrupt the physiological stress response that's occurring right now. And when practiced consistently, those small daily interruptions add up. Many people spend their entire mornings accelerating stress, checking notifications, watching alarming news, jumping immediately into work mode. The 3-minute reset does the opposite. It creates a buffer, a moment where your biology has a chance to move toward balance before the demands of the day begin. Then comes minute number 3. Hydration. This step is often overlooked because it seems too simple, but simplicity doesn't mean unimportant. During sleep, your body loses water through breathing and perspiration. By morning, most people are mildly dehydrated. Even a small degree of dehydration can influence energy levels, mental clarity, physical performance, and metabolic function. Research has shown that dehydration can increase circulating stress hormones and may negatively affect glucose regulation. In other words, dehydration doesn't just make you feel tired. It can influence the very hormonal systems we're trying to optimize. That's why the final minute involves slowly drinking approximately 16 ounces of water, not ice cold. Not rushed, just steady hydration. Some people choose to add a small amount of mineral-rich salt. Others prefer a squeeze of lemon. The exact addition is less important than the hydration itself. What matters is restoring fluid balance after several hours without water. Think about what you've accomplished in 3 minutes. You've activated major muscle groups. You've encouraged glucose uptake. You've reduced nervous system stress. You've started lowering the physiological pressure that can contribute to elevated cortisol. You've rehydrated your body after sleep. And you've done all of this before breakfast, before caffeine, before emails, before social media, before the chaos of the day has a chance to take control. Now here's where things become even more interesting, because what happens after those 3 minutes can determine whether those benefits continue or disappear. The next decision you make is your first meal. And for many adults over 50, breakfast may be one of the most underestimated opportunities to improve insulin control throughout the entire day. Most traditional breakfast foods are built around carbohydrates. Even many products marketed as healthy breakfasts can contain substantial amounts of rapidly absorbed carbohydrates. The problem isn't that carbohydrates are inherently bad. The problem is timing and context. After your body has just worked to stabilize blood sugar and insulin, immediately flooding the bloodstream with rapidly digested carbohydrates can reverse much of that progress. Instead, the first meal should support the metabolic momentum you've already created. And that starts with one nutrient that becomes increasingly important as we age: protein. In the next section, we'll explore why the first bite of your day may have a surprisingly large impact on insulin, muscle preservation, and long-term fat loss after 50. So let's talk about the meal that follows the 3-minute insulin reset, because what you eat next doesn't just affect your hunger. It affects the hormonal trajectory of your entire day. Most people think breakfast is simply about getting energy. But biologically speaking, breakfast is information. Every bite sends signals. Signals that influence insulin, energy production, and even how much fat your body chooses to store or release over the next several hours. And after age 50, those signals matter more than ever. One of the biggest mistakes many adults make is starting the day with a meal dominated by fast-digesting carbohydrates: toast, muffins, pancakes, sweetened yogurt, fruit juice. Even foods that appear healthy on the surface can trigger a significant glucose response. Here's why that matters. Remember the work you've already done. You've activated your muscles. You've reduced stress signaling. You've hydrated your body. You've started creating a more favorable environment for insulin sensitivity. Now imagine immediately pouring a large amount of rapidly absorbed glucose into that system. Blood sugar rises sharply. Insulin rises sharply. The body responds exactly as it was designed to. But now you've interrupted the momentum you spent the first 3 minutes creating weight. Instead, consider a different approach. Lead with protein. Protein is unique because it provides amino acids that support muscle maintenance while generally producing a more controlled glucose response than refined carbohydrates. This becomes especially important after fitness. As we age, maintaining muscle becomes one of the strongest predictors of metabolic health, mobility, independence, and quality of life. Muscle isn't just something that helps you look fit. Muscle is metabolic armor. It helps regulate blood sugar. It helps maintain insulin sensitivity. It helps preserve strength and resilience as the decades pass. That's why a protein-focused first meal can be so powerful. Eggs, Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, fish, lean meat. Protein smoothies built around whole food ingredients. These options provide building blocks your body can actually use. Pair that protein with healthy fats and fiber, and you create an even more stable metabolic response. Avocado, nuts, seeds, olive oil, vegetables. Foods that digest more slowly and help maintain steady energy levels. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is reducing unnecessary glucose spikes during a time when your body is still responding to its morning hormonal environment. Now let's address something important. Will this 3-minute routine magically melt away years of accumulated body fat? No. And anyone who promises that is oversimplifying human biology. Fat loss is still influenced by total nutrition, physical activity, sleep quality, stress management, medications, health conditions, and countless individual factors. But here's what this routine can do. It can improve the starting conditions. Think about a pilot preparing for takeoff. A successful flight doesn't depend on one button. It depends on dozens of systems working together properly before the plane leaves the ground. Your metabolism works much the same way. The first few minutes of your day establish conditions that influence what happens next. If those conditions are favorable, everything becomes a little easier. Energy regulation, glucose management, fat oxidation, exercise performance, even food choices later in the day. Because here's something fascinating. Many nutritional decisions aren't made consciously. They're influenced by physiology. When blood sugar crashes mid-morning, cravings rise. When sleep is poor, hunger hormones increase. When stress remains elevated, comfort foods become more appealing. The body often drives behavior long before the conscious mind realizes what's happening. That's why improving metabolic stability early in the day can create ripple effects far beyond breakfast. And there's another reason this matters after 50. Recovery. When we're younger, the body can often compensate for poor habits surprisingly well. A bad night's sleep, a sugary breakfast, high stress, minimal movement. The body absorbs the impact and keeps going. But as we age, the margin for error becomes smaller. Recovery slows. Adaptation takes longer. The metabolic consequences of daily habits become more visible. This isn't a sign that the body is failing. It's a sign that the body is becoming more honest. The habits that once seemed harmless begin producing noticeable results, which means the opposite is also true. Small, positive habits become more powerful. A few minutes of movement, a moment of controlled breathing, consistent hydration, a protein-rich breakfast. These actions may seem insignificant on their own, but repeated daily for months and years, they can create substantial differences in health outcomes. That's how real metabolic change usually happens. Not through extreme interventions, not through suffering, not through endless willpower, but through small actions repeated consistently enough to shift the body's operating system. And perhaps that's the most important message of all: your body is not broken. If you've struggled with belly fat, if you've struggled with energy, if you've struggled with weight gain that seemed to appear out of nowhere after 50, that doesn't mean you've failed. It may simply mean that nobody ever explained how the game changed. Because the body you have at 55 is not the same body you had at 25. The rules evolve. The biology evolves. The strategy must evolve as well. And once you understand that, everything starts to make more sense. You stop fighting your body. You start working with it. You stop chasing quick fixes. You start building systems. You stop asking, how do I lose weight fast? And start asking, how do I create an environment where my body naturally functions better? That's a much more powerful question. Because sustainable health rarely comes from forcing the body, it comes from supporting it. So tomorrow morning, before reaching for your phone, before checking the news, before pouring your first cup of coffee, try something different. Spend 3 minutes investing in your metabolism.